The house always smelled of cinnamon and old pine. It was a Victorian built in 1890, sitting quietly at the end of a cul-de-sac in a leafy suburb just 30 minutes outside of Boston. My husband Gary and I bought it when the paint was peeling and the porch sagged like an old man's shoulders. We spent 30 years breathing life back into it. Gary fixed the bones. I gave it a soul. When Gary passed away 5 years ago, the silence in the house was deafening. But I never considered leaving. Every creaking floorboard was a memory. Every scratch on the hardwood in the hallway was a map of my son Harrison's childhood, tracing the paths of his toy trucks and clumsy teenage footsteps. I loved this house. It was my sanctuary, my museum, my fortress. I just never imagined it would become the place where I would be hunted. It started subtly, the way rot always does. You don't see it until the wood is already soft. Harrison had always been a good boy, or so I told myself. He had Gary's height, but my softer jawline, and a smile that could talk his way out of any trouble. But somewhere along the line, that boy vanished, replaced by a man drowning in his own bad decisions. He had dabbled in cryptocurrency, lost a small fortune, and then tried to cover it up with a series of failed business ventures. And then there was Jessica. My daughter-in-law was a woman who moved through the world as if everyone in it owed her an apology. She was striking, always impeccably dressed in neutral tones, her hair perfectly blown out, but she had a coldness to her that you could feel before she even entered a room. Jessica didn't converse. She assessed. When she looked at my antique mahogany dining table, she didn't see family dinners. She saw an estate sale. For years, I played the role they assigned me. I was the reliable, invisible safety net. When Harrison couldn't make his car payment, my checkbook was open. When Jessica wanted to go to a wellness retreat in Sedona to decompress from the stress of being a part-time yoga instructor, I paid for it. I did it because of Lily. Lily was 8 years old, a burst of sunshine with missing front teeth and a laugh that echoed through my big, empty house like music. She was the only piece of my son that still felt pure. Every Sunday, they would come over for dinner. I would spend 2 days prepping, roasting the chicken just the way Harrison liked, making sure the mashed potatoes were perfectly smooth because Jessica claimed lumps gave her sensory issues, and baking chocolate chip cookies from scratch for Lily. They never offered to help. Jessica would sit on my velvet sofa, scrolling through her phone, occasionally tossing a passive-aggressive critique into the kitchen. "Eleanor, are you sure you used organic butter? The last time I ate here, I felt so bloated," she would say, not even looking up from her screen. "It's organic, Jessica," I would reply, wiping my hands on my apron, swallowing the sharp retort that danced on my tongue. I kept the peace. That was my mistake. I thought keeping the peace meant I was keeping my family. I didn't realize I was just laying the groundwork for my own erasure. The real shift began on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late October. Harrison showed up unannounced. He didn't bring Lily. He brought a large cardboard box. "Hey, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek with a little too much enthusiasm. He carried the box into the kitchen and set it on the granite island. "Harrison, what's all this?" I asked, eyeing the sleek, modern packaging inside the box. There were 4 small black domes and a hub. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair, playing the part of the weary, deeply concerned son. "Look, Mom, Jessica and I have been talking. You're in this big house all by yourself. The stairs are steep. You're not as young as you used to be." I stiffened. I was 68, not 88. I still gardened. I walked 2 miles a day, and my mind was sharper than his had ever been. "I am perfectly fine, Harrison. I haven't so much as tripped on a rug." I know, he said soothingly, placing a hand over mine. His palm was clammy. "But it's about peace of mind. Our peace of mind. What if you slip in the kitchen? What if someone tries to break in? These are just smart cameras. We're putting one in the living room, one in the kitchen, one pointing at the front door, and one in the upstairs hallway. It connects right to my phone. If anything happens, I'll know instantly." I looked at the little black lenses staring up at me from the box. They looked like unblinking insect eyes. My stomach churned with an instinctual rejection. "Harrison, I don't want to be recorded in my own home. That feels like an invasion of privacy." "Mom, please." He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. "Jessica has been having panic attacks worrying about you. You know how her anxiety is. It would mean the world to us. It's just to keep you safe. Don't you want us to stop worrying?" He knew exactly which buttons to press. He weaponized my love for him, twisting it into guilt. If I refused, I was being stubborn and difficult. If I agreed, I was being a good mother. Fine, I breathed out, the word tasting like ash. But I don't want them in my bedroom or the bathrooms. Of course not. We're not crazy, he laughed, the tension leaving his shoulders instantly. He spent the next 2 hours drilling into my beautiful plaster walls, running wires, and setting up the little black eyes. When he left, the house felt different. The air was heavier. I found myself smoothing my hair when I walked into the kitchen, suddenly hyper-aware of my posture, of my movements. I was no longer living. I was performing. Over the next few weeks, Harrison's behavior changed. It was subtle, insidious. He started calling me more often, but the conversations were strange. They weren't about my day or how Lily was doing in school. They were interrogations dressed up as casual check-ins. Mom, I stopped by yesterday to grab that ladder and the front door was unlocked. Are you forgetting to lock it? He asked one morning. Harrison, I was in the backyard pulling weeds. I left it unlocked for 5 minutes so I could get a glass of water, I replied, irritation flaring. Right, just be careful. Your memory hasn't been the greatest lately. I frowned at the phone. My memory is fine. Sure, Mom, just asking. Oh, and Jessica noticed you put the milk in the pantry instead of the fridge on Sunday. She threw it out just to be safe. You really need to slow down. My blood ran cold. I hadn't put the milk in the pantry. I distinctly remembered Jessica clearing the table while I was washing dishes. She had been the one holding the milk carton. They were gaslighting me. But why? What could they possibly gain by making me feel like I was losing my mind? I brushed it off as Jessica being her usual careless, dramatic self, and Harrison blindly defending her. I told myself not to be paranoid. Then came the rainy Wednesday in November that changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. Lily had spent the weekend with me, and the house was still littered with the joyful debris of her visit. Coloring books on the coffee table, a rogue pink sparkly shoe under the sofa. I was doing a deep clean of the study, a room I rarely used since Gary died. It was mostly filled with old tax documents, Gary's hunting gear, and boxes of Harrison's things from college that he refused to move to his own cramped apartment. While dusting the top shelf of the bookcase, I knocked over a stack of old textbooks. Behind them sat an iPad. It was an older model, the screen smudged and the case cracked at the corner. I recognized it immediately. It was Harrison's old tablet. He had complained about losing it months ago. I picked it up, intending to wipe it down and put it in a box for him. Out of habit, I pressed the home button. The screen lit up. The battery was at 12%. He must have left it plugged in behind the books the last time he was rummaging through the study, looking for his birth certificate, and it had simply sat there, sleeping, occasionally drawing power. There was no passcode. Harrison was always terrible with digital security. I swiped the screen to unlock it, thinking I might find some old pictures of Lily. Instead, the screen opened directly to a cloud storage application. The folder on the screen was titled in bold black letters, Mom's Medical Evidence. My breath caught in my throat. The room suddenly felt very cold, the steady drumming of the rain against the window amplifying the sudden ringing silence in my ears. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling. Medical evidence. I tapped the folder. Inside were dozens of video files, all meticulously dated over the past 6 weeks. Since the day he installed the cameras. I clicked on the first video. It was a clip from the kitchen camera. In the video, I was standing by the stove. I reached for the salt shaker, knocked over a glass of water, and it shattered on the floor. I stood there for a moment, looking down at the mess, my hands holding my head in a gesture of frustration. Then the video cut off. I remembered that day perfectly. A wasp had flown through the open window, buzzing aggressively near my face. I had swatted at it, knocked over the glass, and held my head because the loud crash had startled me. But in the video, there was no sound. Without the buzzing of the wasp, without the context, I looked like a confused, uncoordinated old woman having a sudden cognitive misfire. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked the next video. It was from the living room. I was walking in circles, looking under the couch pillows, lifting magazines, my face twisted in anxiety. Again, no audio. Again, stripped of context. I had been looking for Lily's inhaler. She had been coughing upstairs, and I was rushing to find where she had dropped it. In the silent, cropped video, I looked like a dementia patient wandering aimlessly, lost in my own home. I sat down heavily in Gary's old leather armchair, the iPad resting on my knees. I watched video after video. There was a clip of me standing at the front door in my bathrobe, looking out into the dark. I was waiting for the food delivery driver who had called to say he was lost. There was a clip of me dropping a stack of plates in the kitchen and leaning against the counter, crying. It was the anniversary of Gary's death, and the grief had hit me like a physical blow. They had dozens of these. Short, silent, carefully curated clips. They were building a narrative. They were manufacturing a disease. But the final blow didn't come from the videos. It came from the document saved at the very bottom of the folder. It was a drafted email sent from Harrison to a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize. My eyes scanned the text, the words burning into my retinas. As you can see from the attached video files, my mother's cognitive decline is accelerating rapidly. She is becoming a danger to herself. She leaves doors unlocked, breaks glass, and suffers from periods of severe confusion and wandering. My wife and I are deeply concerned for her welfare. We need to expedite the paperwork for a full conservatorship and medical power of attorney. We need to step in and take control of her estate before she does something irreversible. Please let me know the fastest route to get this in front of a judge. Conservatorship. They weren't trying to keep me safe. They were trying to declare me legally incompetent. They wanted to strip me of my rights, my autonomy, my money, and my home. If they succeeded, I wouldn't even be able to buy a cup of coffee without Harrison's permission. I would be a prisoner in the house Gary and I built, while Jessica picked out my curtains and Harrison drained my bank accounts to cover his crypto losses. The iPad slipped from my lap and hit the rug with a soft thud. I didn't cry. The time for crying had ended the moment I read that email. What I felt wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was a profound, icy clarity. For 35 years I had loved that boy. I had carried him in my body, nursed him through fevers, clapped at his terrible school plays, and bailed him out of every mistake he had ever made. I had given him everything, and his response was to build a cage and try to lock me inside it. I stood up. My knees didn't shake. I walked over to the window and looked out at the rain washing over the street. The world outside looked exactly the same, but my reality had been entirely rewritten in the span of 20 minutes. They thought I was weak. They thought because I smiled and baked cookies and let Jessica insult my cooking that I was soft. They mistook my kindness for stupidity. They forgot that before I was a grandmother, before I was a widow, I was Eleanor Harding. I had survived a difficult childhood. I had managed a household on a shoestring budget during the recession, and I had held my husband's hand as he took his last breath. I was not fragile, and I was not going to be their victim. I walked back over to the iPad, picked it up, and carefully plugged it back in exactly where I had found it behind the books. I wiped my fingerprints off the screen. I left the room, closing the door softly behind me. I walked down the hall, passing beneath the blinking red light of the camera Harrison had installed. I didn't look at it. I didn't let my expression change. If they wanted a performance, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would be the sweet, slightly confused, vulnerable old mother they were banking on. But in the shadows, where their little black lenses couldn't reach, I was going to tear their entire world apart. I was going to let them build their trap, and then, right when they thought the door was locking behind me, I was going to bury them in it. The peacekeeper was dead. The matriarch was going to war. The hardest part wasn't the anger. Anger is clean. Anger is a fire that burns the dry brush away, leaving you with nothing but scorched earth and a clear view of the horizon. No, the hardest part was the acting. The absolute soul-crushing humiliation of having to shrink myself down into the pathetic, failing woman my son and daughter-in-law so desperately wanted me to be. For the next 2 weeks, I became the star of a silent movie they were directing from their smartphones. I learned to play to the little black lenses hidden around my home. When I made my morning tea, I deliberately left the milk carton on the counter to spoil in the sun. I knew Jessica would see it on the feed, and I could almost hear her self-righteous sigh of vindication. When I watered my hydrangeas on the front porch, I made sure to leave the front door standing wide open for 20 minutes, staring blankly at the sky as if I had forgotten what I was doing. Every time I did these things, my chest tightened with a sickening mix of grief and revulsion. I was desecrating my own sanctuary, but I kept the end goal in sight. If they wanted evidence of my decline, I would give them a masterpiece of dementia. I would make them so confident in their victory that they would never see the executioner's axe falling. But I couldn't fight a legal battle from my kitchen counter. I needed an arsenal, and I knew exactly who to go to. Arthur Sterling was a relic of a bygone era, the kind of lawyer who still wore three-piece wool suits in September and kept a crystal decanter of scotch on his mahogany desk. He had drawn up Gary's and my wills, handled the closing on our house 30 years ago, and sent me a handwritten card every year on the anniversary of Gary's passing. He was sharp, utterly ruthless in a courtroom, and most importantly, fiercely loyal to my family. The real family, the one Gary and I had built, not the twisted version Harrison had created. I didn't dare drive my own car to his office. Harrison had insisted on installing a safety tracking app on my phone a year ago, claiming it was just in case I got a flat tire. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, next to a half-eaten piece of toast, ensuring the cameras saw exactly where it was. Then I slipped out the back door, walked 3 blocks through the crisp autumn air, and flagged down a taxi. Arthur's office smelled of old paper, leather polish, and pipe tobacco. When his secretary ushered me in, he stood up, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together in concern. "Eleanor," he said, his gravelly voice warm, "this is a surprise. You usually call a month ahead. Sit down, please. Let me get you some coffee." "No coffee, Arthur," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling as I unclasped my purse. "I need your help, and I need it to be completely off the books for now." I sat in the heavy leather chair opposite him and laid it all out. I didn't cry. I spoke with the clinical precision of a surgeon diagnosing a terminal illness. I told him about the cameras, the gaslighting, and the iPad. I recited the exact wording of the email Harrison had drafted to that estate lawyer. Conservatorship, medical power of attorney, expedite. As I spoke, Arthur's warm demeanor vanished. His posture stiffened, and his eyes, usually crinkled with grandfatherly amusement, turned to chips of gray flint. By the time I finished, the silence in the room was heavy enough to suffocate in. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "A conservatorship," he murmured, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. "He is trying to legally strip you of your personhood, Eleanor. If a judge grants it, you won't be able to sign a check, choose your own doctor, or decide where you live. He would have absolute dominion over your estate." "I know," I said quietly. "He thinks I'm an old fool. He thinks I'm just going to roll over and let him take the house Gary built." Arthur let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Then Harrison has forgotten who raised him. He's forgotten that you managed the books for Gary's contracting business for 20 years and never missed a single decimal point. So what is our counter move? Do we confront him? Change the locks?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "If I confront him now, he'll just adapt. He'll play the victim, say he was only trying to help, and then he'll find another, quieter way to blindside me. I want him to think he's winning. I want to build a wall around my assets so high and so thick that by the time he realizes he's locked out, he won't even be able to see the top of it." A slow, predatory smile spread across Arthur's face. "I see. You want an irrevocable trust." "I want whatever makes me untouchable." We spent the next 3 hours drafting the blueprint of my liberation. An irrevocable trust was a financial fortress. Once my assets, the house, the savings, the investments, were transferred into it, they legally ceased to belong to me. Therefore, Harrison couldn't touch them, even if he miraculously convinced a judge I was completely senile. We named an independent fiduciary firm as the trustee, and I named my granddaughter Lily as the sole ultimate beneficiary, locked tight until she turned 25, with ironclad clauses that strictly forbade her parents from accessing a single dime. "There's one more thing," Arthur said, his pen hovering over the legal pad. "The house. If he thinks he's getting it, he's going to push hard. We can put it in the trust, but there is a more poetic option given the circumstances." He explained the concept of a reverse mortgage, executed in tandem with the trust. I could pull the vast majority of the equity out of the house in a lump sum, funnel that cash directly into Lily's untouchable educational fund, and live in the house for the rest of my life. When I passed, the bank would own the house. Harrison would inherit absolutely nothing but an empty shell and a debt he couldn't afford to pay. "Do it," I said without a second of hesitation. "Draft it all. But Arthur, no one can know. Not a whisper." "My lips are sealed, Eleanor. But you must be careful. If Harrison is desperate enough to pursue a conservatorship, he is likely financially underwater. Desperate men do reckless things. Arthur's warning proved prophetic less than a week later. It was a Sunday evening. Harrison and Jessica came over for our usual dinner, but Lily wasn't with them. She was at a friend's sleepover, Harrison claimed. The moment they walked through the door, I knew they were putting on a show. Jessica wasn't wearing her usual immaculate makeup. Her skin looked sallow, her eyes were rimmed with red, and she walked with a slow, exaggerated fragility, leaning heavily on Harrison's arm. They sat at my kitchen island, leaving the roast chicken I had prepared untouched. "Mom," Harrison began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. He reached out and took his wife's hand. "We have some terrible news. We didn't want to tell you because we know how much you've been struggling lately with your memory, but we have no choice." I put down my dish towel, schooling my features into an expression of maternal terror. "What is it? Is it Lily? Is she hurt?" "No, Lily is fine," Jessica choked out, a single perfect tear sliding down her pale cheek. She pressed a tissue to her mouth. "It's me, Eleanor. I'm sick. I've been diagnosed with a severe chronic autoimmune disease. The doctors say it's attacking my nervous system. If I don't get aggressive treatment, I could end up in a wheelchair. Or worse." I gasped, bringing a hand to my chest. It was a good performance on my part, but inside my lie detector was screaming. Jessica looked about as sick as an Olympic gymnast. "Oh my God, Jessica, that's horrific. What are the doctors doing? What hospital are you at?" "That's the problem," Harrison interrupted, his grip tightening on her hand. "The standard treatments here aren't working. Her only hope is a specialized experimental stem cell therapy at a private clinic in Switzerland. It has a 95% success rate, Mom. It could save her life." "Then you must go," I cried, playing the frantic mother. "Book the flights." Harrison looked down at the granite countertop, the picture of a broken man. "We can't. It's not covered by insurance. The clinic requires the money up front. It's $40,000, Mom, plus travel and accommodations. We've maxed out our credit cards. We have nothing left." He looked up at me, and there it was, the hook, the entire reason for this theatrical display. "Mom, I know you own this house outright," Harrison said softly, his voice trembling with just the right amount of desperation. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a matter of life and death. But could you take out a small mortgage? Just $50,000? I swear on my life I will pay every single cent of it back. I just can't lose my wife. Lily can't lose her mother." It was a masterstroke of emotional manipulation, using Lily as the ultimate weapon. Any normal mother, any normal grandmother would have driven to the bank that very second and signed her soul away to save her family. And Harrison knew it. He was counting on my love to blind me to the logistics. I looked at Jessica. She was staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, playing the dying swan to perfection. "Oh, Harrison," I whispered, reaching out to touch his cheek. Of course I will help you. Let me call the bank tomorrow and see what I can do. We will get Jessica that treatment." Jessica let out a loud, shuddering sob and reached across the island to hug me. As her arms wrapped around my shoulders, I smelled her perfume. It was Baccarat Rouge, $300 a bottle. Funny how a woman who couldn't afford medical treatment smelled like luxury. "Thank you, Eleanor," she whispered into my ear. "You're saving my life." "We're family, Jessica," I whispered back to the empty air over her shoulder, staring directly into the blinking red light of the camera on the wall. Family does whatever it takes. When they left, I didn't call the bank. I called Arthur. "They made their move," I told him, pacing the length of my hallway, staying carefully in the camera's blind spots. "Jessica is faking a terminal illness. They want $50,000 from the house equity to send her to a clinic in Switzerland." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Switzerland? Points for creativity, at least. I assume you agreed?" I gave them an Oscar-winning yes. "But Arthur, I need proof. If this escalates to a judge, I need to show exactly why I cut them off. I need a private investigator." "I know just the man," Arthur replied. "Mike Reynolds, ex-Boston PD. He's discreet, he's fast, and he doesn't tolerate scammers. Give him 2 weeks." I gave Mike Reynolds exactly 12 days. During that time, I kept up the charade. I told Harrison the bank was processing the paperwork, but there were delays because of my age and lack of current income. I let him sweat. I let him call me 3 times a day to check on the progress, listening to the mounting panic in his voice as his fictitious deadline approached. On a Tuesday morning, while Harrison and Jessica were at work, a plain manila envelope arrived in my mailbox via priority overnight shipping. There was no return address. I took it into my study, closed the door, and sat at Gary's old desk. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm as I broke the seal and tipped the contents onto the leather blotter. A stack of glossy 8x10 photographs slid out, accompanied by a detailed 4-page typed report. I picked up the first photo. It was Jessica. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She wasn't in a hospital gown. She was walking out of a high-end luxury car dealership in downtown Boston, carrying a designer handbag, looking exceptionally healthy and radiant. In the next photo, she was signing paperwork at a desk. The report attached noted that Jessica and Harrison had just put a non-refundable cash deposit down on a brand new, fully loaded Lexus SUV, scheduled for delivery the following month. I flipped to the next set of photos. Jessica and her friends at a day spa in the Berkshires, clinking glasses of champagne by a heated pool. Jessica carrying shopping bags out of a Neiman Marcus. Then, I turned to the financial summary Mike Reynolds had managed to dig up. It was worse than I thought. Harrison hadn't just lost money in crypto. He was drowning in high-interest loans. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage. The $40,000 for Switzerland wasn't for a clinic. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to stave off foreclosure on their own home and maintain their lavish lifestyle, entirely at my expense. They weren't just trying to put me in a conservatorship to protect my assets. They were trying to drain my assets to save themselves. They viewed my life's work, my home, my security, as nothing more than an emergency slush fund for their own greed. I sat in the quiet of my study, the glossy photos spread out before me like a tarot reading of betrayal. The woman in the photos, laughing with champagne, was the same woman who had sobbed in my kitchen, using my granddaughter's future to extort me. The man who had signed for that luxury SUV was the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy who was now actively plotting to have me declared legally insane. I gathered the photos, squaring the edges meticulously, and placed them back into the manila envelope. I locked the envelope in the bottom drawer of Gary's desk, turning the heavy brass key and slipping it into my pocket. The trap was fully built. The bait was set. My assets were secured, the trust was finalized, and the reverse mortgage funds were safely locked in Lily's name. I had all the evidence I needed. Now all I had to do was wait for Thanksgiving. I was going to serve them a holiday dinner they would never, ever forget. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. For 30 years, this house had been the beating heart of our extended family. Gary used to carve the turkey at the head of the table, his booming laugh echoing off the wainscoting, while I fluttered between the kitchen and the dining room, making sure everyone's wine glass was full. This year, the air in the house felt entirely different. It smelled of roasted sage, butter, and caramelized yams. But underneath the rich aromas lay a thick electric tension. I spent the morning preparing the meal with the meticulous focus of a general outlining a battlefield. Every piece of silverware was polished. Every linen napkin was perfectly folded. I wanted the stage to be flawless for their final performance. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing my apron over my burgundy dress. I walked to the foyer and swung the heavy oak door open. Harrison stood on the porch, holding a store-bought pecan pie. Jessica was beside him, leaning heavily against his shoulder, her face powdered pale to keep up the charade of her tragic illness. Lily, my sweet granddaughter, bounded past them immediately, throwing her arms around my waist. "Grandma, I missed you," she squealed, her face buried in my apron. "I missed you too, my little pumpkin," I smiled, stroking her hair. But as I looked up, I noticed a fourth person standing awkwardly on the porch step. He was a man in his late 40s wearing a corduroy blazer and wire-rimmed glasses. He had a soft, doughy face and a neatly trimmed beard. "Mom," Harrison said, his tone overly gentle, the kind of voice you use to speak to a frightened animal. "This is Greg, Dr. Gregory Evans. He's a friend of ours from the city. He didn't have any family to spend the holiday with, so we hoped you wouldn't mind if we brought him along." I looked at Dr. Evans. He offered a polite, practiced smile. I knew instantly who he was. He wasn't a stray friend. He was a prop. He was the professional they had brought in to validate their intervention. "Of course not," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed warmth. Any friend of Harrison's is welcome at my table. Come in out of the cold." We moved into the living room. Jessica immediately sank into the nearest armchair, letting out a dramatic sigh as if walking the 10 feet from the car had nearly killed her. "Can I get you some water, Jessica?" I asked, playing the doting mother-in-law. "Or maybe something stronger for your pain?" "Just water, Eleanor, thank you," she whispered bravely, pressing a hand to her temple. "The doctors say my nervous system is just so fragile right now. The trip to Switzerland cannot come soon enough." I nodded sympathetically, though internally, I was picturing the glossy photograph of her carrying designer bags out of Neiman Marcus. I sent Lily upstairs to the spare bedroom where I had set up a new movie she had been begging to watch, complete with a tray of her favorite snacks. I wanted her entirely insulated from the bloodbath that was about to occur downstairs. Once I heard the television click on through the ceiling, I returned to the dining room. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Every time I reached for a dish, Harrison watched my hands. Every time I paused to remember a neighbor's name from a story I was telling, Dr. Evans would tilt his head, his eyes tracking my hesitation like a predator watching a limp. "So, Eleanor," Dr. Evans said smoothly, cutting into his turkey, "Harrison tells me you've been living in this big house all alone for quite some time now. That must be overwhelming to manage. The maintenance, the stairs, the daily routines." "I manage just fine, Gregory," I replied, taking a delicate sip of my Chardonnay. "It's just that, well, memory can be a tricky thing as we get older," he continued, leaning forward using his doctor voice. "Sometimes we don't even realize we're forgetting things, leaving doors unlocked, misplacing items. It can become a safety hazard before we even know it." Harrison placed his fork down heavily. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why we're all here today." Here it comes, I thought. The trap is springing. Jessica reached across the table to grab Harrison's hand. She looked at me with eyes so full of fake pity it made my stomach churn. "Eleanor, we love you so much. We just can't sit back and watch you decline anymore. It's tearing us apart." Harrison reached down into his leather messenger bag beside his chair. He pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it squarely on the antique lace tablecloth, right next to the gravy boat. "Mom," Harrison said, his voice cracking with a manufactured sorrow that would have won him an Emmy. "We've been worried sick. We've seen the signs. We've had to take precautions. The cameras I installed, they caught things you don't even remember doing. You're a danger to yourself." "Harrison, what are you talking about?" I asked, letting my voice waver just slightly, widening my eyes in perfect, helpless confusion. Dr. Evans folded his hands on the table. "Eleanor, as a medical professional consulted by your son, I've reviewed footage of your behavior over the last month. You are displaying classic rapid-onset signs of severe cognitive impairment, dementia, or perhaps Alzheimer's. You are no longer capable of safely managing your own affairs." Harrison pushed the manila folder across the table toward me. "These are legal documents, Mom. A medical power of attorney and a petition for a conservatorship. We've already spoken to a judge. We want you to sign them voluntarily. It'll make it so much easier. I'll take over the finances, the house, your medical care. You won't have to worry about a single thing ever again. We'll even help you transition into a nice, safe, assisted living facility." "And what about Jessica's treatment?" I asked quietly, staring at the folder. "The $50,000 for Switzerland?" Harrison didn't miss a beat. "Once I have legal control of the estate, I can authorize the loan against the house myself. You'll be saving Jessica's life, Mom, and I'll be saving yours." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They had sat at my table, eaten the food I cooked, and now they were asking me to hand over the keys to my kingdom so they could sell it for parts. They expected me to cry. They expected me to be terrified. They expected the frail, confused old woman they had convinced themselves I was. I looked at the documents, then I looked at Harrison, then at Jessica. Finally, my gaze settled on the fake doctor. Slowly, I reached out and pushed the folder back across the table. It slid over the polished wood and bumped against Harrison's water glass. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. When I spoke, my voice was as calm and cold as a frozen lake. "I'm not signing a damn thing." Harrison blinked, momentarily thrown by the shift in my tone. "Mom, you don't understand. If you don't sign this voluntarily, Dr. Evans is prepared to testify in court. We will do this the hard way if we have to." "Dr. Evans," I said, turning my gaze to the bearded man, "are you a board-certified neurologist?" He cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, Eleanor. I specialize in— Are you my primary care physician? I cut him off, my voice cracking like a whip. Well, no, but based on the video evidence— Video evidence, I repeated, a cold smile finally touching my lips. I reached down beside my chair and picked up my own leather briefcase, which I had quietly tucked there before they arrived. I placed it on the table with a heavy thud. I popped the brass latches. The sound echoed loudly in the silent dining room. Since we are sharing medical assessments today, I said smoothly, pulling out a thick bound document, I thought I should share mine. This is a comprehensive neurological and cognitive evaluation conducted last week by Dr. Eris Thorne, the head of neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital. I tossed the bound report across the table. It landed squarely on top of Harrison's conservatorship papers. You'll find the results quite fascinating, Dr. Evans, I continued, not taking my eyes off Harrison. MRI scans, cognitive load testing, psychiatric evaluations. Dr. Thorne concluded that my brain is in the top 5% for my age bracket. I have 0 signs of dementia, 0 cognitive decline, and perfect executive function. His exact words were that I am sharper than most medical residents. Harrison stared at the report, his mouth slightly open. The color began to drain from his face. You went to Mass General? I did, I said. Because when I found your old iPad hidden in the study, logged into the cloud folder where you were actively doctoring security footage of me to build a fraudulent medical profile, I figured I should get a second opinion. Jessica let out a sharp, choked gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. You found the iPad, Harrison whispered, his voice barely audible. The confident, condescending son had vanished, replaced instantly by a terrified little boy who realized he had just been caught stealing from the cookie jar. I found everything, Harrison, I said, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table. The anger, the clean, burning fire I had held back for weeks, finally bled into my voice. I saw the emails to your lawyer. I saw you plotting to steal the house your father broke his back to pay for. Mom, wait, it's not what you think, Harrison stammered, his eyes darting around the room wildly, looking for an exit strategy that didn't exist. Things got out of hand. We are in terrible debt. The crypto crashed and Jessica's medical bills. Ah, yes, Jessica's tragic, fatal illness, I interrupted. I reached into my briefcase a second time and pulled out the manila envelope Mike Reynolds had sent me. I didn't toss it. I deliberately opened it, pulled out the glossy 8x10 photographs, and dealt them across the table like a blackjack dealer handing out losing cards. A photo of Jessica walking out of the Lexus dealership. A photo of Jessica sipping champagne by the resort pool. A photo of Harrison signing the paperwork for the luxury SUV. A miraculous recovery, I said, my voice dripping with venom. To go from needing a wheelchair to test driving a $60,000 car in just 3 days. Medical science truly is astounding. Jessica stared down at the photo of herself at the spa. Her powdered, pale face suddenly flushed a deep, ugly crimson. She looked up at me, the mask completely slipping, revealing the vicious, cornered animal underneath. You hired a private investigator? She hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You spied on us? You put hidden cameras in my living room, Jessica, I shot back, my voice rising just enough to command the room. You sat at my kitchen island, cried fake tears, and tried to extort $50,000 from me by pretending you were dying. You tried to use my love for my granddaughter to rob me blind. Dr. Evans pushed his chair back from the table, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the floorboards. He looked terrified. He had thought he was walking into a routine, sad case of an old woman losing her mind. He hadn't realized he had been dragged into a conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Harrison, you didn't tell me she had been evaluated by Mass General, the fake doctor stammered, grabbing his coat off the back of his chair. You told me she was entirely compromised. I cannot be a part of this. Good evening. He didn't walk out. He fled, the front door slamming shut behind him, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Harrison sat frozen, staring at the medical reports and the photographs of his own greed laid bare on the lace tablecloth. He looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes. Real tears this time. Tears of panic. Mom, he choked out. Please, you have to understand. We were desperate. The bank is going to foreclose on our house next month. We have nothing. I didn't want to hurt you. I needed the equity in this house. You don't even need all this space. This is not a bank, Harrison, I said, my voice dropping back to that terrifying quiet. This is my home, and I am not your rainy day fund. I am your mother, and you tried to bury me alive." Jessica stood up, her chair violently tipping backward and crashing to the floor. "Come on, Harrison, we don't have to sit here and listen to this. If she wants to be a selfish, paranoid old crone, let her keep her stupid, dusty house. Let's go." "No," I said softly. They both stopped, looking at me. "You don't get to storm out of here indignantly," I said, standing up from the head of the table. I smoothed my napkin and placed it neatly next to my untouched wine glass. "You don't get to pretend you have the moral high ground. You are leaving because I am throwing you out." Harrison looked destroyed. "Mom, it's Thanksgiving." "I know what day it is," I replied, "and I am deeply thankful that I found out exactly who you both are before it was too late. I want you out of my house. Now, do not pack up the leftovers. Do not take your coats from the closet until you are walking out the door. Just get out." Jessica grabbed her expensive purse, her face twisted in a sneer. "Fine, but we're taking Lily. Have a nice, lonely rest of your life, Eleanor." "Lily stays," I commanded. Jessica laughed harshly. "Excuse me? I am her mother. You can't keep her." "Lily is upstairs watching a movie," I said, stepping around the table, putting myself directly between them and the staircase. "She thinks we are having a lovely adult dinner down here. If you march up there right now, drag her out of bed, and ruin her holiday because you threw a tantrum after getting caught committing fraud, I promise you, Jessica, I will hand these photographs and the iPad footage directly to the district attorney tomorrow morning." Jessica froze. "Elder abuse, attempted extortion, and wire fraud," I listed calmly. "I wonder how that will affect your yoga studio membership. You can pick Lily up tomorrow at noon. Tonight she is staying here, safe and happy." Harrison swallowed hard. He looked at his wife, then at me. He knew I had him completely beaten. He had brought a knife to a gunfight, and I had just dropped a nuclear bomb. "Let's go, Jess," he mumbled, broken. They walked to the hallway in silence. They put on their coats. They didn't look back. When the heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, the house was plunged into a sudden, echoing stillness. I stood in the foyer for a long time, listening to the sound of their car engine starting up and fading away down the street. I looked back at the dining room. The turkey was getting cold. The beautiful pie Harrison had brought sat untouched on the sideboard. The paperwork of my attempted demise littered the table. My hands finally began to shake. The adrenaline was leaving my system, leaving behind a hollow, aching grief. I had won the battle, but I had lost my son. But as I looked up the stairs, hearing the faint, muffled sound of a cartoon playing in the guest bedroom, I straightened my spine. I was bruised, I was heartbroken, but I was not broken. And they had no idea that the real punishment, Arthur Sterling's irrevocable trust and the reverse mortgage, was still waiting for them in the dark. The legal bloodbath hadn't even started yet. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Boston was hit by an early biting frost, the kind of cold that seeped through the window panes and settled deep in your bones. It matched the climate of my own life perfectly. I hadn't heard from Harrison or Jessica since I had thrown them out of my dining room. Lily had been picked up the next day by a silent, furious Jessica, who snatched the child's overnight bag from my porch without making eye contact. I kissed Lily's forehead, told her I loved her, and watched them drive away, feeling a sharp physical ache in my chest. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Harrison was desperate, and desperate men, as Arthur Sterling had warned me, do reckless things. The first strike came not as a phone call, but as a thick, certified envelope delivered to my door on Tuesday morning. I signed for it, my hand steady, and carried it to the kitchen island. It was a formal legal summons. Harrison had hired a new lawyer, a bulldog from a downtown firm known for aggressive litigation. The documents claimed that my behavior on Thanksgiving, kicking out family, paranoid delusions regarding hidden cameras, and irrational financial accusations, was clear evidence of a sudden, severe psychotic break. They were petitioning the court for an emergency, temporary guardianship to freeze my assets and force a psychiatric hold. They also demanded the immediate sale of my house to cover outstanding family debts. I read the paperwork twice. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I simply picked up the phone and dialed Arthur Sterling's direct line. "They filed," I said quietly when he answered. I could hear the dry rustle of paper on Arthur's end. "I know, Eleanor. The petition crossed my desk 20 minutes ago. It seems Harrison decided to double down on his stupidity. "What's our move, Arthur?" "We don't move," Arthur replied, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "We let them walk right into the brick wall. I've scheduled a mediation meeting for Thursday morning at my office. I informed his attorney that we are willing to discuss terms to avoid a protracted court battle." "You want me to negotiate with them?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Oh no, Eleanor," Arthur chuckled softly. "We aren't negotiating anything. We are going to hand them the shovel they've been begging for and watch them dig their own graves." Thursday morning arrived gray and overcast. I dressed meticulously in a tailored charcoal suit, pinning a small silver brooch Gary had given me for our 20th anniversary to my lapel. I wanted to look exactly like the woman they were trying to erase, sharp, capable, and unyielding. When I walked into Arthur's expansive corner office, Harrison, Jessica, and their sleek, sharp-suited lawyer were already seated on one side of the long mahogany conference table. Harrison looked exhausted, his eyes underscored by dark, heavy bags. Jessica, however, looked victorious. She sat with perfect posture, a smug, tight smile playing on her lips, clearly believing that this meeting was my surrender. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his hands folded neatly over a pristine manila folder. I took the empty seat to his right, across from my son. I did not greet them. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We are here to address the emergency petition filed by Mr. Harding regarding the estate of Eleanor Harding." Harrison's lawyer, a man named Vance, leaned forward aggressively. "Mr. Sterling, let's not waste time. My clients are deeply concerned for Eleanor's well-being. The incident on Thanksgiving clearly demonstrated—" "Save the performance, Mr. Vance," Arthur cut in sharply, raising a single manicured hand. "We are not in a courtroom, and there is no jury to sway with fabricated medical concerns." Vance bristled. "Excuse me? Are you implying my clients are lying about her cognitive state?" "I am stating it as a matter of legal record," Arthur said, sliding a thick stack of paper across the polished wood. "That is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Dr. Eris Thorne of Mass General, detailing Eleanor's pristine neurological health. It is accompanied by a countersuit drafted by my office for defamation, elder abuse, and attempted extortion, citing the fraudulent video evidence your client attempted to manufacture." Vance's eyes darted down to the documents, then shot a furious glare at Harrison. Clearly, Harrison had conveniently forgotten to mention the Mass General evaluation to his new bulldog. Harrison slumped in his chair. "Mom, please. We didn't want it to come to this." "You filed for a psychiatric hold on your own mother, Harrison," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I think we are exactly where you wanted us to be." Jessica crossed her arms, the smug smile faltering slightly. "You can waive all the doctor's notes you want, Eleanor. The fact remains you are sitting on a massive paid-off asset while your family is drowning. The house is half Harrison's anyway. It was Gary's." Arthur let out a soft, dry laugh that echoed in the tense room. He reached out and touched the pristine manila folder sitting in front of him. "Mrs. Harding," Arthur said, addressing Jessica directly, "your grasp of inheritance law is as flimsy as your grasp of medical ethics. The house on Elm Street was solely in Eleanor's name through right of survivorship. However, your point about the asset is somewhat moot." Vance frowned, sensing a trap. "Moot? What do you mean?" Arthur slowly opened the folder. "Eleanor brought me in 6 weeks ago to review her estate planning. She felt it was time to secure her legacy and ensure her assets were protected from undue external pressures." Arthur pulled out a thick bound document with a blue legal cover and slid it toward the center of the table. "As of October 28th, Arthur announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "Eleanor Harding officially transferred the entirety of her estate, including the Elm Street property, all liquid savings and investment portfolios, into an irrevocable trust." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a detonation, before the shockwave hits. Harrison stared at the blue binder as if it were a venomous snake. A what?" "An irrevocable trust, Harrison," Arthur explained, speaking slowly as if addressing a slow child. "It means the assets no longer belong to Eleanor. They belong to the trust. She is merely a beneficiary who is allowed to reside in the home. Therefore, even if you miraculously convinced a judge she was incompetent today, there are 0 assets for you to manage. The estate is sealed." Jessica's face drained of color. She looked at Vance, panic rising in her eyes. Can she do that? Can she just hide the house from us? Vance flipped frantically through the trust document, his eyes scanning the legalese. This is airtight, he muttered, sounding almost impressed despite himself. The trustee is a corporate fiduciary firm, and the ultimate beneficiary, he looked up at me, his expression unreadable, is Lily Harding, your granddaughter. Yes, I said quietly, looking directly at Jessica. The trust is structured entirely for Lily's education and future, with an ironclad stipulation that neither you nor Harrison can ever act as a trustee, custodian, or access the funds under any circumstances. Jessica let out a choked, hysterical noise. You gave everything to an 8-year-old? We are about to lose our house, Eleanor. We are going bankrupt. That is a tragedy of your own making, Jessica, I replied, my voice hard. You chose to finance a luxury lifestyle on debt, assuming my death or my dementia would eventually bail you out. You gambled with my life and you lost. Harrison was hyperventilating, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. The house is gone? Not quite, Arthur said, the dry amusement returning to his voice. He reached into the folder one last time. This was the final nail, the masterstroke. You see, Harrison, Arthur continued, Eleanor wanted to ensure Lily's trust was fully funded immediately. Relying on property value is unpredictable, so concurrent with the trust formation, Eleanor executed a reverse mortgage on the Elm Street property. Vance actually dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the mahogany. A reverse mortgage? On a fully paid-off Victorian in that neighborhood? Precisely, Arthur nodded. She withdrew $800,000 in equity. That cash is now sitting securely in Lily's untouchable trust fund. Harrison looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide with a horrified, dawning realization. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. What did you do? I protected myself, I said, leaning forward, holding his gaze without blinking. You tried to steal my house, Harrison. You tried to steal my mind. So I took the value out of the house, locked it away where you can never touch it, and I will live in it until the day I die. And when she passes, Arthur added smoothly, twisting the knife, the bank will call the loan. The house will belong to them. Unless, of course, you wish to inherit it, Harrison. In which case, you are welcome to pay off the $800,000 reverse mortgage balance, plus accrued interest. Jessica let out a scream, a raw, furious, shattering sound. She leaped to her feet, pointing a shaking finger at me. You vindictive, evil old witch, she shrieked, all pretense of elegance gone. You ruined us. You intentionally bankrupted your own son to prove a point. I didn't bankrupt you, Jessica, I said, my voice rising over her hysteria. Your greed bankrupted you. The Lexus dealership bankrupted you. The crypto market bankrupted you. All I did was remove myself as your collateral. This is insane, Harrison yelled, standing up next to his wife, slamming his fists on the table. You can't do this. We are your family. I am your son. A son does not put cameras in his mother's home to build a false medical record, I shot back, the anger finally breaking through the ice. A son does not try to lock his mother in a psychiatric ward so he can pay off his credit cards. You ceased being my son the moment you saw me as an obstacle instead of a person. Vance, the aggressive lawyer, was already packing his briefcase. He knew a dead end when he saw one. He had been promised an easy conservatorship over a confused old woman. Instead, he had walked into a meticulously planned legal ambush orchestrated by a woman who had outsmarted them all. Mr. Harding, Vance said tightly, not looking at Harrison. We are done here. I strongly advise you to withdraw the emergency petition immediately, or Mrs. Harding's countersuit will financially obliterate whatever you have left. He turned to Arthur, nodded curtly, and walked out of the room. Harrison and Jessica were left standing there, stripped of their weapons, their leverage, and their future. They looked at the blue binder on the table, the physical manifestation of the inheritance they had lost through their own arrogance. Jessica grabbed her coat and stormed out without another word, her heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. Harrison lingered for a moment. He looked at me, a desperate, hollow pleading in his eyes. He looked like the little boy who used to break a window with a baseball and beg me not to tell Gary. But I wasn't going to fix it this time. There was no Gary to hide behind. There was only the consequence of his actions. Mom, please, he whispered one last time. Goodbye, Harrison, I said softly, turning my gaze away from him and looking out the window at the gray Boston skyline. I heard his footsteps slowly retreat, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. The silence that filled the conference room this time wasn't heavy or oppressive. It was light. It was the silence of a slate being wiped clean. Arthur Sterling let out a long breath, closing the empty manila folder. Well, Eleanor, I believe that concludes our business. The trust is secure. The house is yours for as long as you need it, and I highly doubt they will ever bother you with legal threats again. Thank you, Arthur, I said, a profound, aching weariness finally settling over my shoulders. You gave me my life back. You took it back yourself, Eleanor. Arthur smiled gently. Gary would have been incredibly proud of you today. A single tear finally slipped down my cheek, hot and stinging, but I brushed it away quickly. Gary would have kicked him out of the house the day he brought those cameras in. 6 months later, spring finally broke through the New England frost. The hydrangeas on my porch were blooming a brilliant, fierce blue. I sat on the porch swing, sipping my morning tea, watching the neighborhood wake up. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet now. The oppressive weight of Harrison and Jessica's constant surveillance and manipulation was gone. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine, because in a suburb, nothing stays secret forever, that their house had been foreclosed on in February. They had filed for bankruptcy and moved into a small, cramped apartment 2 towns over. Jessica had reportedly filed for divorce shortly after the Lexus was repossessed. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. I felt a deep, lingering sadness for the son I had lost, but I also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I had survived them. Every Sunday afternoon, a silver sedan pulled into my driveway. It was Jessica's sister, bringing Lily to visit me for the day, per the new ironclad visitation agreement Arthur had drafted for me, funded, of course, by a small legal stipend from the trust to ensure Lily's care. Lily bounded up the porch steps, missing front teeth now replaced by 2 large adult ones, her laughter ringing like a bell. "Grandma!" she yelled, throwing herself into my arms. "Hello, my beautiful girl," I smiled, hugging her tight, breathing in the scent of strawberries and fresh air. We went inside to the house that was no longer an inheritance waiting to be stolen, but simply a home, a fortress that had withstood a siege. I helped Lily bake chocolate chip cookies, listening to her chatter about school and her friends. I was 68 years old. I lived alone in a big, creaky Victorian house. I was technically deeply in debt to a bank, and my own son wasn't speaking to me. But as I watched my granddaughter pull a fresh tray of cookies from the oven, her face glowing with pride, I realized something profoundly true. I had never been richer, and for the first time in years, I was completely, undeniably free.